Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Seatrade Maritime News webinar. Are you getting the most from your connectivity solution? Sponsored by Speedcast and broadcast by Informa Markets. I'm Marcus Hand, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a few announcements before we begin. The webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Towards the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey, found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now, on to the main topic of today's webinar. The presentations on Are You Getting the Most from Your Connectivity Solution are extremely timely. Connectivity in the maritime world has never been more important than it is today. The industry was already undergoing a digital revolution with much greater and faster communication between ship and shore before the COVID-19 pandemic hit this year. The current situation has turned remote solutions for areas such as statutory surveys and in-house audits from a nice-to-have to a necessity. Equally, crew communication has taken on a new level of importance. Our speakers will examine the state of the maritime communications market and the developments we are set to see in terms of satellite coverage and bandwidth available to ship owners. But it's not simply about having the communications infrastructure, but being able to manage it effectively and get the best from your systems and the opportunities they afford to improve your operations. We will learn how best to do this and, importantly, ensure that operations are cyber secure as well. Discussing today's topics are Brad Grady, Principal Analyst, NSR, and Sandro DeLucia, Product Director, Commercial Maritime at Speedcast. To learn more about our speakers, visit the Bios widget. I would now like to turn over to Brad Grady from NSR.
Great. Thank you, Marcus, and good morning, everybody. So today we'd like to talk about a few things. One of them is trends in the maritime market, changes in the satellite sector, so new satellites and capacity and those kinds of factors. I'll focus a little bit on one of those subsets of capacity for the maritime VSAT sector, analyze the merchant sector, and then kind of do a bottom line summary of everything of how all of this is introducing enhanced complexity into the networks and onto ships. A little bit about NSR. My name is Brad Grady. I'm a principal analyst focused on mobility markets, and I cover predominantly aeronautical, maritime, land mobile, government sectors on the satellite space. We're entirely focused on the space and satellite value chain, focusing on everyone across the value chain from end users, such as cruise ships and other maritime users, government and military, all the way up to satellite manufacturers. But I think we really can't talk about anything these days without talking about COVID-19 impacts and what that means to current plans and future plans, and trying to kind of assess some of the uncertainty that's going on in the market. So we reached out to our customers and clients and asked them what they thought from the satellite and space perspective their customers were going to see, and which impacts and which verticals and which markets we're going to see the significant impact, maybe no impact, maybe even a slightly positive impact if you're in the government sector. You might be seeing increased demand for connectivity to connect field hospitals, disaster response, consumer broadband, everyone is at home. social distancing and increasing their demand. But in the aeronautical and cruise sector, I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody. Significant impacts in terms of their usage for satellite services. And more relevant to us is at the very bottom in that other mobility where merchant maritime and other maritime sectors say a little bit in that kind of the slightly significant impact to the low impact. So all of this kind of uncertainty in the market has really resulted in a couple of things. One is that delayed investment in connectivity infrastructure, but there's still these ongoing requirements for connectivity for shipboard functions. Now, looking at the macro picture of what's going on a sector-by-sector basis, merchant sector crew connectivity seems to be, one of those applications that everyone has been talking about. Maybe finally we're really starting to deploy those applications and see a lot of utilization of those services. All resulting in a higher transition towards VSAT connectivity, so higher throughput, better quality services. But near-term challenges, growth shifting slightly to the right, plans getting delayed a few years. Passenger and offshore, significant impacts there. Passenger, obviously, because people are not, going on cruise ships, or cruise ships are just kind of idling around with their crew only on board. They're not engaging in kind of commercial activities. The offshore side, significant impacts from kind of crude pricing instability and other challenges, and ultimately the lower demand for oil and gas services is kind of commerce has slowed down. Fishing, leisure, really those are two sectors where you can imagine the super yacht side, lots of demand for connectivity there as folks that have super yachts have kind of gone out to sea to ride out their social distancing. And those kinds of factors on the smaller end of that leisure side, you can imagine that as people embrace more social distancing-esque leisure activities, maritime and boat ownership is probably going to be one of those outlets that people are going to look at. Fishing, they still have that demand for better connectivity, probably more so now that they still need to stay in touch with loved ones and understand market dynamics as they're unfolding. But overall, all maritime sectors are really feeling that kind of near-term impact from COVID-19. But let's dig a little bit deeper into what's really going on all the way up in space, down to the ground, and on the vessel basis. So there's a couple of kind of revolutionary changes that are undergoing that have been in the news, and you may have heard about them. One is new orbits. So today, the majority of satellite services are delivered via geostationary orbit. Those are satellites that are basically station kept, and if you are sitting any place in the Earth and you look up, the satellite essentially doesn't move from your perspective. That's been traditionally where all the capacity is getting delivered from. Now, stepping a little bit closer to the Earth, we have MEO, Middle Earth Orbit. That's where options like O3b, which is predominantly in the cruise and oil and gas sector, they have 12 satellites or 18 satellites that are being launched and delivering services there, closer to the Earth, so the latency is lower, higher throughputs. But the real revolution is happening in LEO. You may have heard about OneWeb that recently filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. SpaceX continues to launch their LEO satellites. So these are much, much closer to the Earth, enabling a lot lower latency. And presumably they're also going to be offering higher capabilities. So newer capabilities, lower orbits, has fundamental changes on how end users, so maritime customers, need to think about what type of connectivity and services and infrastructure they're doing. Now, simultaneously, we're also looking at new networks. So if you've kind of been in the market for satellite services, traditionally, if you think about direct-to-home services, those types of options, those are done by what we call traditional satellites or wide beam. These are like ocean-sized coverages. They cover up to a third of the Earth at a time. They allow easy roaming, but that really comes at a cost of per-ship throughput. Now, that's changing, and the satellite sector has kind of advanced and is moving on to much smaller footprints, spot beam footprints, which is more kind of cellular-based, where the satellite's footprint is divided into kind of smaller beams, allowing much higher throughput per beam. potentially allowing smaller antennas, allowing smaller vessels to enable higher throughputs. But ultimately, more capabilities come at the cost of more complexity, and end users are really facing more choices than ever before as they build and select satellite connectivity solutions. And meanwhile, this is all adding an exponential amount of HTS high throughput satellite supply, about 880 gigabits per second in 2016, all the way up to about 18,000 gigabits or 18 terabits a second in 2024. So a fundamental shift in the amount of capacity that is available in orbit. Now, what that means is as a consumer of satellite services, you're probably going to be able to get better and better connectivity solutions, better and better throughputs, enabling faster and faster data services. And all of that is great because when we talk to end users and we talk across the value chain, everyone is deploying more and more applications. I like to think of kind of applications in the maritime space in kind of three silos: crew welfare, shipboard functions, and business requirements. And each one of these sectors that we talked about earlier really depend and have a different preference of the distribution of which one of these applications. Crew welfare, I think everyone is fairly familiar with. It's social media, it's the internet, it's email. Emerging applications are kind of video-focused social media, so being able to do video chats, send video clips. News, sports, world events, very timely functions and requirements these days. But overall, the goal is just greater access to friends and family that are ashore and removing that disconnected feeling seafarers have. Shipboard functions in the middle here are really part of these kind of, quote, connected container digitalization programs in the merchant space. You can imagine these are chart updates or equipment monitoring, route optimization, anything that kind of is involved in the function and operation of a maritime vessel. And then there's the business requirements. And now business requirements also these are particularly geared towards the merchant sector, but you can also imagine business requirements would fit into kind of passenger connectivity if you're a cruise ship, or oil and gas drilling and logging and those types of functions. If you're if you're on that side. But these are kind of corporate email and HR programs, crew assignments, cybersecurity concerns, anything that's kind of relevant to the business operations of the vessel. And now I think with that, we'd like to get some of your thoughts, Marcus, through a poll question.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. This is, as Brett said, we want to get the views of those of you listening in and through the webinar. So we have a poll. As you'll see, the question up here: what applications do you expect will drive more bandwidth consumption over the next 5 years? And we have 4 choices: crew welfare, shipboard functions, business requirements, or all of those 3 growing equally. So click one of those and then press submit. Brad, what do you think is likely to be the answers to this?
So I think it's probably either going to be the shipboard functions or all growing equally. Crew welfare, I think, is going to be a significant consumer, but I'll be curious to see what the audience says, because one of those things could go either way. Once you start adding in video-based applications, demand with demand just jumps through the roof.
Yeah, so if you start doing those sort of things where you're, I don't know, live in the engine room for maintenance or something with video, yeah, it would massively increase. Yeah,
no, absolutely.
Okay, let's
streaming YouTube consumes lots of data.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Okay, we've given people a little bit of time to submit their answers. Let's have a look to see what people think. Okay, well, it seems that all growing equally was the biggest there. And I'm going to pass this back to you, Brad.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And I think that this really does show kind of the importance that having networks and capabilities of adapting to all of those changing business requirements. If we did this webinar last year, I'd imagine crew welfare probably wouldn't have shown up on too many people's radar, because crew welfare predominantly was just adopting a website access or those kinds of generic email, internet. But ultimately, this is all pushing migration towards a VSAT-based solution. So from our research, we see about 50,000 vessels who adopt a VSAT-based solution over the next 10 years. So you can imagine these are kind of the larger dishes that you put on board the vessel, enable greater throughput, more of a regular fixed cost. They're not kind of the metered services that you would expect from like the Iridium or Inmarsat on their L-band services. And all that is, again, because vessel owners, as we kind of saw through the poll question, are requiring more throughput. From our research, it's over the next 10 years, or from 2019 to 2029, it's nearly a 9x increase in throughput demand from maritime end users. So this is across all maritime segments. So you can imagine cruise ships, while last year were a significant driver of bandwidth demand, not nearly as large of a driver. But even then, there's still crew that are on board those ships. They're still functioning as a maritime vessel. They still have engines and fuel monitoring and all those other kinds of things. So the bandwidth demand is not zero right now. But in 2019, we saw about 80 gigabits of VSAT capacity demand, all the way going up to about 700 plus gigabits per second. And for merchants specifically, that really does mean a shift to VSAT, and within that, a shift to HTS-centric connectivity. So about 15,000 net additional merchant vessels over the next 10 years, all of those vessels starting to migrate towards VSAT-based solutions as their primary communication services. And because of that, they're all adopting more of an HTS-centric role. So for us, Inmarsat Global Express Service is what we would consider HTS. There's other options from SES and Intelsat, and Speedcast has HTS capacity built into their network. So even if you don't necessarily know that you're using HTS services, you may or may not be using that as part of your network solution that you're getting from your service provider. But overall, even with the downturn in economic activity that's potentially on the horizon, so we're not quite sure what the world's going to look like as we all start to emerge, from our social distancing requirements and other kind of pandemic response activities. There's really a huge demand for robust satellite connectivity over the next 10 years. And as we saw in the poll question, it's a little bit of everything. It depends on kind of, is it crew focused, or is it remote monitoring or control, or is it vessel-based applications, the business needs, kind of a mission focus of that ship. So all in all, networks are really getting more complex. Digitalization programs continue. They may be delayed, but no one has really said, hey, I'm not going to actually connect that container. I'm not going to enable that equipment monitoring. I'm not going to enable all of these great digital-focused revolutionary programs that were designed before COVID-19 to control costs and are probably even needed more now. Satellite and space sector is undergoing rapid changes from new orbits and new networks, and that means your ground infrastructure on board your vessel is changing. And satellite services are to provide more capabilities at more throughputs, all at the added cost of more complexity. I think with that, I'd like to bring Sandro into the conversation, and he can tell you a little bit more about what Speedcast is offering. Sandro?
Hello, everyone. At Speedcast, I have the pleasure of working with a highly talented group, teams dedicated to driving the strategy and development of our smart platform. Today, I would like to explore the drivers and attributes that are important in this key component of a vessel's digital infrastructure. So I'm going to start with some background. Our industry is undergoing a major transformation. In fact, all industries are, for that matter, not just shipping. And it's not solely about technology, but also strategic business models and frameworks that underpin an organization. Digital business has the potential to assist in the transformation of the way shipping companies, satellite operators, resellers, and solution providers actually operate in practice. But implementing technologies and enabling organizational change are not always simple tasks. Organizations need to adopt the solutions most appropriate for their businesses so that they can update legacy systems, underlying processes, train effectively, optimize operations, and future-proof their business models. The effective implementation of digital technologies also has implications for supporting organizational change and this raises bigger issues to address sooner rather than later. Herein, more than ever, given the current situations, and even prior to the current circumstances, lies a key contributor to a company's competitiveness or survival. One of the principal drivers of digital transformation is technology, which is evolving at a great pace, with a need for plentiful, usable, and real-time data. Data is now critical as it takes decision-making into the light. However, on board a vessel, harnessing communications and respective management of infrastructure is critical in ensuring the efficient and continuous transportation and protection of data in parallel with safety, welfare, and operations. So as a basis for these technologically driven functions and service, there are fundamental factors that must be in place to support the business as a platform for manageable maritime digital communications activities, a digital nexus. Today, I will explore the following 4 essential quadrants that are critical in a platform for smarter network management. And this is running alongside the communications that Brad has been referring to. So 1, smarter management, by harnessing the power of diverse communication options and integrating these as fully functional and dynamic solutions. 2, seamless control, whereby end-to-end operations and crew welfare can be managed remotely through a single platform in conjunction with voice services and critical operational applications and systems. 3, stronger protection through the implementation of multifaceted cybersecurity components. And finally, 4, boosted efficiency, enabling multiple critical applications on diverse platforms to run as virtual machines or VMs, which significantly reduce IT costs and ensure high performance and support transformation strategies. So starting with smarter management, this is about seamless connectivity in essence. Across the global fleets, continuous connectivity is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. High volume, high quality communication is in demand everywhere, as we saw in previous slides. There are different bands, different frequencies, different tasks, and a multitude of use cases. Requirements from vessel to vessel will always be varied, and there is no reason to assume that all owners and operators will require the highest throughput or the most heavily specified systems. And hence, these must be correctly proportioned and calibrated to applications, communications, sensory, and cyber needs. Some vessels can perform the tasks they require with only L-band, whereas others will need full global VSAT with the service level agreements and value-added services that go with this. So your connectivity provider should understand your needs and your position, and position itself as a partner supporting your business, whether it's through crew connectivity, IoT, virtualization, or elements of the digital strategy, and provide a system that reflects your journey, taking into account the people involved and what they actually do on a daily basis. Many providers can deliver different bands and speeds, but these must be harnessed by the power of smart management, acting as a nexus between the abstraction of cellular and satellite, the vessel infrastructure systems, applications, sensors, and data. It must encompass the strategy of today and for tomorrow as well. Connectivity is managed through automated link management mechanisms today that monitor the connection status and switch between one WAN and the other, governing and prioritizing the allowed pathways of application traffic subject to the nature of the chosen link. Now we are moving into a world where it has become more common to manage multiple sources of connectivity with greater intelligence, whereby resources portioned for specific applications according to the quality of respective links, providing optimized resource to satisfy data needs and advanced communications. In cruise and in energy, a technology called SD-WAN, both bespoke and custom solutions are given in these areas. We actually develop these technologies in-house as well for the cruise and energy markets. But developments for these high-end areas are also propagating at the high end of commercial maritime and will become more common, in my opinion, especially in the light of heightened VSAT and LTE and 5G multimodalism and adoption, and the promise of next-generation satellite networks, as described before, and drivers, application drivers such as backups, systems, updates, and exchange of data services to the cloud. and also possibly the enhancement of welfare services to include, especially in the light of separation, longer times at sea, to also include more video on demand and aspects of that nature, and more crew welfare solutions. Another aspect is well-defined network management. The key component of smart management is to coherently organize and configure the logical architecture of a network in an easy-to-use portal that seamlessly mirrors its state to and from the cloud. Its layout must be easy to use and understand for configuration and diagnostics. Smart management facilitates demarcations within the network infrastructure, either through defined segregated networks or carefully layered VLAN. This is a key attribute which, in tandem with integrated firewalls, provides a basis for security through careful segmentation of networks and subnets. Moving on, seamless control. A smart maritime platform provides end-to-end access and visibility to business operations crew welfare applications within a single environment, including control of voice services and critical systems and operational applications. The network supports all the services you need. An integrated smart network provides the actual platform. However, it is the service and the applications running on it that deliver the value to the ship, its crew, and the business, and of course, its customers. For example, it should be able to provide the crew with voice, including integration with local and office PBX, support integrated cyber-protected mail servers, and even video conferencing on a par with traditional corporate networks in the light of new LEO constellations on the horizon. It must support both ship operations and also crew welfare, the ability to manage crew welfare with layered fair use policies in order to balance the resource between various operational and crew services. And of course, critical applications like secure delivery of digital charts, weather data, digital publications, and other aids to navigation, plus the integration of data from sensors, monitoring engines, systems, and cargo conditioning, and transit it all to a central office for real-time analysis. And must provide a service VM platform and ecosystem where, for example, online training systems can be activated and exploited with immediate effect in parallel with other dedicated VMs. It must support safety and security monitoring systems using both data and video if required. Provide access to cloud-based applications for personal management, ship management, and other services. And for all of the above, there's a necessity for access control and remote management, even more so than ever. It is imperative that any service can be utilized, managed, monitored, and updated from anywhere at any time. Can you control and manage access on board the ship as if it were part of the central or regional office? Connect to the onboard systems you need to access with protocols you wish to use on the same network over a secure VPN tunnel, as if it were in the office, or access applications to support operations, monitoring, and maintenance. Do you need to maintain, backup, and monitor your VMs or your containers as we enter a world where hyper-virtualization is becoming a normal conversation as IT managers aim to cut costs by consolidating resources? A smart network and data management platform is needed where individual secure and bandwidth-efficient streams can be established to whatever you need to manage across a fleet. This impacts how management actually happens, who does it and where, with granular access rights to portals or modules to the right level of expertise. Opening the possibilities of always-on data-driven connectivity comes with the need to manage not only access to bandwidth, but also the increasing number of applications that support operations, monitoring, and maintenance. This allows you to run solutions or applications for cybersecurity, crew connectivity, entertainment, content distribution, and much more. Moving on to stronger protection. How important is safety and security? Our reliance on a communications network and digital applications has widened the risk of possible security risks in a highly complex, interconnected world. An integrated network must be able to defend itself from these threats around the clock and around the world, as the impact can be devastating. The IMO requires shipping companies to incorporate cybersecurity best practice into safety management systems, or SMS, no later than January 2021, whereby shipping companies are left to determine what cybersecurity gaps exist in their SMS, how to identify which changes are necessary, and how to integrate newly developed cybersecurity protocols with their SMS when renewing their document of compliance. Inevitably, cybersecurity gaps can translate into high-cost propositions for shipping companies seeking advisory support as they begin to tackle the IMO cybersecurity requirements. Obtaining data, protecting data, and transporting it to the right place is critical, but data must be secured throughout its journey prior to usage or analysis. A viable cybersecurity solution must be adaptable to constantly changing threat landscape. However, as a basis, given a methodology that integrates industry-leading cybersecurity standard frameworks and standardized practices with key elements of the IMO's International Ship and Port Security Code and the International Safety Management Code, would serve as a foundation to help clients assess their cybersecurity posture, identify their vulnerabilities, and action prioritized recommendations, consequently providing insights into stronger overall protection. At Speedcast, we call this Cyber Insights. Once established, various segments of a security strategy can then unfold. And as a starting point beyond that, in the implementation of those recommendations, as a bare minimum, a comprehensive universal threat management system is required to provide a range of powerful defense tools, including next-generation firewalls, providing intrusion prevention systems, application control, and threat prevention through inbuilt antivirus, advanced threat prevention, harnessing URL filtering, sandboxing, and SSL inspection, and much more. And these can be consolidated on powerful VMs on smart platforms, as cybersecurity as a service. A viable cybersecurity solution must be adaptable to the constantly changing threat landscape, exploiting the seamless exchange of real-time threat intelligence that can quickly and dynamically respond to cybersecurity threats and report clearly through dashboards and tailored reports. Therefore, with subsequent layering of security components, the basis must be constantly reviewed and constantly strengthened. Cybersecurity has evolved from being a business imperative to a regulatory requirement as shippers, charters, and agencies push ship owners harder to put protection into place. And now we're just going to move over to a poll question on cybersecurity.
Yes, thank you, Sandro. So quite a simple question, this one, that relates to where he sort of kicked off on that slide, which is, will you be compliant for this IMO cyber compliant January 2021? 3 fairly simple choices: yes, maybe, or no. I must admit, and so please take your choice and press the submit button. It'd be really interesting to see if people are going to be are prepared for this one. I personally wonder whether perhaps with everything that's going on at the moment, whether this one's perhaps slipped off the radar a little bit. I don't know what you think, Sandra.
I think it's still incredibly important to de-risk any cyber threats, and more so than ever. And also, especially in the light of the number of people also working from home as part of any company, that there are also associated cyber risks with that that can link to the shipping industry and any industry as well. I think it's just as important as ever.
No, certainly would agree with that. Let's have a look to see whether people are prepared for the IMO cyber compliancy in January 2021. Okay, that does not seem to be the right set of answers. Okay, sorry, we seem to go to the wrong slide there. There we go. 25% say they will be compliant, 17.9% worryingly no, and maybe is the majority is maybe 57.1%. And I'm going to hand back to you, Sandro.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting results. Very happy about the 25%. I think the maybes are probably in transit, busily working hard to make that happen. And just continuing in the story of the four quadrants regarding smart network management, one that's particularly close to my heart is the boosted efficiency. This is a key part of the digital strategy. So digitalization is in effect affecting how ship owners and managers run their businesses and what they actually require from their technology partners. So implementing technologies and enabling organizations to use them effectively is not particularly simple, but especially where legacy systems, old or out-of-date implementations, might actually slow down new ways of doing business, with impending need to minimize cost in the process. One example of this transformation is the accelerated uptake of virtual machines on smart maritime platforms, where the spare capacity is available and can be scaled accordingly, thus boosting the efficiency of the available resource. Why buy an expensive server, maybe $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $11,000, $12,000, when the spare capacity is at your fingertips and more on a pre-existing device that can be part of a monthly operational lease? So this is something that's happened quite extensively in the office, where people have converted a lot of their physical infrastructure onto the cloud and things like Amazon Web Services and so on. VMs have now become a core element of modern IT infrastructure on the vessel and on shore, enabling IT managers to drive down the costs through promoting the uptake of virtual machines across the fleet and on shore, rather than on multiple individual nodes. Therefore, this manifests as a significant CapEx reduction, reduced administration time, diminished power consumption, lower operating cost, reduced licenses, and also it eases conformity to standardization if you're pushing out the same VM with its applications across the fleet. So there's cybersecurity implications as well. Also, other aspects include multiple operating systems. It's possible to have multiple VMs in the VM ecosystem running on a hypervisor. You can have Linux running inside Windows Server, across another Linux server, etc. And therefore, you can run multiple instances of VMs for different types of applications that you may want to isolate. A key part of this is also being able to allocate resource to those VMs, whether it's CPU, disk space, or RAM. And that also has implications towards cyber, especially regarding CPU caps. And this, in due course, can be scaled and can be scaled remotely when required. So the systems are now being drawn out of legacy systems and being implemented as virtual machines. So let's talk a bit about remote installation and management. Let's talk a little bit about remote installation and management and health monitoring. Installations can be performed from scratch using either VM files, that's QCal files, or ISO files, typically the file format you'd find on a legacy CD, DVD, ROM for installing an operating system. And this can reside in a dormant state on the platform, ready for remote activation or restoration. So, for example, at the time of build, one could have the implementation of Windows Server all laid out, ready on the machine to be deployed whenever the IT manager wishes to do that with a standardized configuration. This kind of implementation is rapid and speedy, and one that can be distributed using pre-configured operating systems and applications with a few clicks remotely. Additionally, there is portability, the ability to back up, relocate, and restore virtual machines using snapshots or cloning. Of course, you need coherent backup policies and multiple levels of protection like RAID, NAS servers, cloud. And I think these things, in conjunction with technologies like SD-WAN, will also all work hand in hand in tandem. Also, an IT manager can switch to standby VMs in the event of emergency or prototype a particular VM without any consequence or implication. which is very, very powerful. So if a VM were to go down, if it were damaged, then this could be restored from a backup or rebuilt very quickly from the original. Another area are pre-installed VMs. With a smart network management platform, it's possible to pre-install functions such as cybersecurity, weather, training, navigation, and so on, as dormant VM files that remain hidden until they're activated remotely by simply clicking on a button or perhaps entering a license key. And then they're available to the user. In addition, for those who wish to remove legacy hardware, there's a service called P2V, or physical to virtual. And this can be used to extract an entire system from a physical device, a physical server, and convert it into a virtual machine. So how is this currently being used? Well, one of the most common uses is running a Windows server on network management platform and perhaps a database or SQL, using it as a domain controller, or perhaps as a Windows terminal server or Citrix sync clients. And other instances include network monitoring tools, either paid or freeware, and where they might be monitoring tags or agents or SNMP traps. So there are a variety of ways that this space can be used and configured in a safe, cyber-secure manner. So to summarize, we have smarter management, harnessing and integrating the power of device communication options, as we saw in Brad's presentation. Seamless control, whereby operations and crew welfare can be managed remotely through a single platform in conjunction with voice services and critical operational applications and systems. Stronger protection through the implementation of multifaceted cybersecurity components, identifying cyber insights, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering. A constant cycle of cybersecurity improvement, de-risking. We can boost efficiency, leveraging spare capacity instead of spending a fortune on a server, and in a VM ecosystem to enable multiple critical applications, reducing costs, optimizing efficiency, and driving positive digital transformation strategies. So this is our vision that we are working on that forms the basis of Sigma, a smart maritime platform. So thank you very much for listening. I just want to mention before we move on to the final poll question that there will be 2 white papers available to download today, and this will be complemented with an additional paper in a few weeks' time. So thank you very much for listening today, and I'll hand over to you, Marcus, for the final poll question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandro. 2 absolutely fascinating presentations there. And we're going to finish this with a poll question. Just get this up on screen. But to finish off, following on from that presentation, we're going to ask you to choose from 5 choices here. When choosing a connectivity solution, how important is the onboard service management solution to your choice? We have 5 sort of scales of choice here, really. Not at all important, slightly important, important, fairly important, or very important. So please take your pick and press submit. I'm guessing Speedcast would probably like your, Sandra would probably be hoping your response is to this one. It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of this. Just before we move into the question and answer session for this. And I see that some of you have been submitting questions as we've been going along. That should have given everybody a few seconds to actually submit their responses there. So let's see what people thought about this. Okay. Well, some good news is that nobody thinks it's not important at all when choosing how the onboard service is managed. 34.6% choosing important and very important, and fairly important 23.1%, and slightly important 7.7%. So I think as an overall we can see from that this is clearly something that the audience sees as being important.
Excellent.
Yes. So we are now. Sorry. Apologies. Right. We are now going to move to the Q&A part of our event. As a reminder, you can participate in the Q&A. Just type your question into the text box located right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we're not able to answer all the questions submitted today during the webinar, we will be sure to share them with the relevant speaker, who can reply to you offline after the event. Now let's have a look and see what we've got from the audience. Okay, this is one for Speedcast. Sorry, I guess that's you, Sandra. Has Speedcast considered a flat panel antennas? I'm not sure if that's something that you do.
Yes, it is. We have a flat panel. We're using Kymeta. We have a service using Kymeta flat panel antennas. Which has been launched. Yes. So the answer to that is yes, absolutely. If you'd like more information on that, please contact me, and I can provide you with that.
Okay, great. That was a very easily answered question. Here we go. I'm not quite sure who to direct this one at. How do you see laser satellites, and will quantum communication change the satellite world? I'm not sure which Brad or Sandra would like to take a stab at that question.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess I'll start, Sandra, and then you can add in. So, in theory, yes, right? Now the question is it going to change the commercial merchant sector? And the answer is probably not. The laser satellites, instead of using communication paths in the RF spectrum, they use it in the optical spectrum. So these are kind of like the Bond villain, beam it from space lasers, right? You know, quote unquote. Right now, it's being used mainly for UAVs. Very high throughput capabilities, as you can imagine. You know, fiber optic, that kind of stuff. But highly susceptible to atmospheric attenuation. So trying to get through the clouds and all those other things all the way down to a ship on the ground in a stormy port, probably not a basis for a reliable network. Quantum computing is a little different. That has some interesting things. I'm not quite sure quantum communications in terms of just general IP traffic, but you know, for things like cybersecurity and those types of crypto keys, that definitely could be an interesting area.
Sandra, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree from the cybersecurity aspect of that. I think there have been some uses in quantum computing, but the thing that actually I find very interesting for the future, I don't know how distant that will be, and I'm often afraid of this happening, is that if we have, there have been experiments using individual few photons, where I thought the question was transportation at the beginning, but there have been experiments on quantum transportation at photon level, where it's possible to determine the path of a photon and where the probability of that may occur, and that is a precursor to actually using aspects of quantum theory in communication as well, because if you can convey a photon to another location, then that is a means of communication. And so I think there exists potential for that in the future, and there have actually been experiments in this realm, but only at an individual photon level. So I think that's a very, very exciting level. I think quantum computing will bring a whole host of new technologies, but yeah, that's my thoughts on the subject.
Okay, thank you. It's a very, very sort of forward-looking question. That perhaps something that's rather more grounded in what's available right now, and that is how flexible is a VSAT service in using different platforms to give global coverage. Sandra, I'm guessing If you'd like to try that one.
So how flexible? Okay, well, are you referring to the flex between KU and KA and the platforms that are available now from various providers? Because there is flexibility in changing various components on modern satellite antennas now, whether it's components actually on the antenna or the ACU or GMU. So there are options to upgrade and change from one satellite network to the other, whether it's KU or KA, through upgrade kits. So that technology already exists. That's quite straightforward. There are also technologies where where they're kind of hybrid terminals that can switch between different bands. These are commonly used in high-end markets, cruise, energy, and it's possible to switch state between C band and KU band or KA, and these are very, very sophisticated antennas. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's one way of approaching it, and the antenna manufacturers have brought in technology to enable that to happen.
I think that answered the question. Sorry. Yeah, I think that answers it as I understood the question. Let's put it that way. Thank you, Sandra. Plenty of questions coming in. I think probably something that comes up a lot here. The concept, the fact that the more data you use, the more has to be paid. So, do you charge for additional features and additional services? And how does this sort of you keep this value-added benefit from higher data subscription? So, I guess the sort of trade-off between cost and the value add.
Well, I mean, it really depends on the actual value add that you're using. I mean, there are a lot of value adds. I mean, for example, if you take navigation, for example, it's a relatively for the updates, it's a relatively small file transfer, but there are benefits above and beyond that if different technologies are used. So it's a balancing act between what satellite system you're using, how you're paying for it, and also how you balance that between all the other applications that you need. There are other applications like training, for example, where there's a lot of static training courses that are available, then updated periodically. But in each case, there are methods around that. Having come from worked on projects like Fleet Broadband and Fleet Express and so on throughout my years in SATCOMs, that firstly, I don't think the trend of actually reduced price per megabyte or for flat rate is probably going to continue the way it's been going. And I think that will facilitate the use of a lot of these applications. Of course, you have to balance that between all the variables. Even with elements like proactive monitoring and cybersecurity, there is an overhead, but the trade-off is quite minimal compared to the cost of and the risk that's associated with not having those critical elements in place. And that includes things like training as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. I think cost is always going to be something that everyone wants to know about. This is another one for you, Sandra, and that's asking how easy it is to migrate to Speedcast services for Maritime if there is a solution from another vendor already in place.
It really. Well, I mean, firstly, in the crudest form, one can. It really depends on what system is on board at that time. Speedcast. I mean, we pride ourselves on having a diversity in the solutions that we implement as an overall solution. whether it's L-band, KU, KA, or C-band, or cellular. So we would respond to any scenario where a customer wishes to migrate. As I mentioned before, there are some mechanisms for migrating KU to KA, KA to KU, depending on the actual terminal that's being used. But other than that, it's a relatively straightforward process. But also the dynamics of that depend on what you're going from A to B as well. But we'll probably find that very straightforward and address that as depending on the particular scenario. So if somebody has a particular scenario where they're addressing migration, please let me know. Now, of course, in migration, it's not just about the satellite and the hardware and so on. One of the most, when you're migrating, operations have to continue. So there have to be strategies in place to actually make sure that there is business continuity. And a classic case would be in the very simple but very critical application in Maritime, and that's email. That's critical for all of us. But for example, for email continuity, there are a whole variety of methods that can be adopted to use legacy systems and new systems through various gateways. And that's just one example where that it's important to keep everything going at the same time. And I think they're kind of areas of migration that are quite significant, and to keep things actually going. Swapping out antennas, upgrading antennas, changing BDUs, they are principally physical elements. But maintaining that continuity is critical, and that's something that we're heavily involved with in various migration activities.
Great, thanks, Sandro. I think I'm conscious I've been directing most of the questions at you, Sandro. This is one for Brad on NSR. Someone's asking, is there market research data available on the average spend per vessel for solving onboard IT issues by the means of sending engineer or a superintendent?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Marcus. So from my view, I don't have the data, but here's what I can say. Anytime you send a person to a vessel, it's generally really expensive, especially depending on what market you're talking about. In oil and gas, that could be something as complex as getting on a helicopter, going across the North Sea, landing in the middle of the storm, all to fix a plug that's not plugged in correctly. So even if it's just something as simple as sending somebody on in the port on board the vessel, that's still expensive. You still have to pay for that person's time. That's probably the only thing they could do that day. Maybe they can go to, a second ship that happens to be in the same port. But it's a very costly endeavor. So I think that's why we're seeing on our side, when we ask and talk to end users, there's lots of interest when you start to go down the what value-added services are you considering adopting pathway of talking about, hey, can I have remote monitoring, remote control, remote capabilities introduced into my network? So it's a very popular topic to reduce those costs and spends.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brad. And we're really coming up to the amount of time we've got for this. There's still quite a few questions that we haven't got to. We will forward these on to the speakers so that they can connect to you on email to answer these. And I'd just like to thank you all for submitting questions and participating. It's been great. Thank you to Brad and Sandro. We appreciate your time and expertise on the topic. And the audience, obviously, we appreciate your attention and participation today. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentations on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to this event to view these as well. There's lots of great information there, as you will have seen. This webinar is copyright 2020 by Informa Markets, and the presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by Seatrade Maritime News. And the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of Brad from NSR and Sandro from Speedcast, I'd just like to thank them for their fantastic presentations, and thank you all for your time, and have a great day or evening ahead. Thank you.